Hey everyone, here we are at the definitive unit tier list for Dead Ahead. To be honest, it was a lot trickier than I thought, mainly due to the various skins most units possess, which for some will either drastically raise or lower their viability as a unit. In addition to that, different stats and items along with different builds will mean some slight variation in opinions on rankings, so just something to bear in mind on that. But even with all that, I'm confident we could come to a happy medium on where they rank as a whole. I'll be judging units based on their overall effectiveness in their role, their gear dependency, and how well they fit with their assigned team. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. The first one on our list is our starting character, the redneck. At first glance, he doesn't look like much, and for the most part, he isn't. His stats are low and he has no knockback or stun. However, despite all that, he's actually a very good unit because of his propensity to activate team powers or item set bonuses, mainly the boss set. This is what I refer to as an activator unit, something that usually applies to the fighter class, and Redneck is very good at this given he's so cheap and spammable. As a Redneck on that team, he's able to utilize the 2 and 5 man bonus of generating courage very well, being able to give the player an endless stream of resources. This is especially the case in Toxic Fog levels or against enemies who use poison. In his hillbilly skin, he's great at being spammed out the door in hopes of utilizing that team's 3-man bonus of dropping turrets, as well as repairing the bus. Lastly, in all his skins, but most notably his Northerner skin, he's used to maintain the uptime on the boss item set bonus for long periods of time or at critical moments, boosting the damage of all other units by 25%. He combos very well with units like Lester and Farmer to increase their burst damage output. So basically, while he doesn't do much to kill enemies himself, he sort of acts like a very good team player for everyone else. If nothing else, he's able to delay the enemies long enough for someone more powerful to come out and finish them off. Redneck isn't very gear dependent. The only thing he really needs is cost reduction, a little bit of prep time reduction, and the boss set when you're able to collect that. In story missions, he works best as a redneck and mechanic, followed by his Northerner skin and then his college skin. Low A tier for the first two, low B tier for the second two. Therefore, I think he has a comfortable place as a B tier unit. Next up is Berserker, and Berserker is my favorite unit from the Circus pack, mainly because he's the most powerful of the three, I think. He's tied with Saw for being the cheapest unit in the game, yet he can pack quite a punch when he's outfitted correctly with crit damage and melee damage boosting gear. The fact he costs Rage instead of Courage is an extra bonus, making him a good fit for any team since he doesn't compete for resources. He just becomes this fire and forget type character. His available skins, Psychos and Emergency, are both very good for him, with Emergency maybe being the better of the two because he's the only spammable unit in that faction, making him an essential unit who benefits nicely from all their perks. He does very well in generating Courage as a Psycho as well. His only downside is his ability to inspire fear in other units, including yours, so others on the field need to either have a bit of valor or charisma to compensate for that. He's also not able to be the initial guy out the door, given the fact that he does cost Rage instead of Courage, which is too bad because on paper he would make an excellent initial unit to come out on a lot of missions. Other than that though, he's an excellent choice. My own advice is to, outside of PvP, not focus on cost reduction so much, as Rage buildup is pretty easy to acquire on most levels, especially as a Psycho. He's one of the few units where you can forego cost reduction and go all in with other stats. Berserker to me is a high A tier unit for sure. Saw, on the other hand, is Berserker's more inferior cousin, I think. He's not bad, and in fact, he's marginally outperforms Berserker in stats, yet he isn't as effective as Berserker. There are a few reasons for this, but let's highlight the positives first. Saw's big draw is his chainsaw hit, which will deal multiple critical hits to the enemy. His final perk of dealing double damage to the barricade can also serve a good purpose in those situations where you're in a tight spot and breaking down the barricade. He's a little more sturdy than Saw, but much slower, which is his main problem. All his swings are slower, and he just feels more sluggish. Worst of all, he's the only character besides Nancy who instantly transforms into a zombie upon death, making resurrecting him impossible and immediately posing a threat to your own team as a result. The animation for his transformation involves him doing a back roll towards the bus before transforming, making it more pesky to deal with. Worse yet, if he dies too close to the bus, It's possible for him to res as a zombie behind the doors at a location where other characters can't target him, allowing him free reign to hit the bus as much as he wants. His zombie form, the monk, while not particularly strong, does have a knockback hit which makes him a bit irritating to deal with. Like Berserker, he does better with his alternative skin, Dr. Sanchez for the scientists, than he does for the psychos, but both are good and useful. Also like Berserker, he uses rage and ties for them for the cheapest unit in the game. I like using Saw, but he's a character you need to be a bit wary of, which makes sense. After all, how trusting would you be of a guy in a hockey mask wielding a chainsaw? All in all, I'd probably say Saw is high C tier character, maybe a low B. Glenn. At first glance, Glenn might come across like 3 stronger rednecks packed into one unit, with one ready to come out as soon as the other dies. That seems like a lot of value, 25 courage for 45 courage worth of units, but in practice it doesn't work out that way. My main issues with Glenn are a few, but in short are as follows. Number 1, when he dies in story missions, he takes anywhere between 8 to 10 seconds to self-res, which in a tight spot is a lot of downtime, especially given his cost. Number 2, he has no knockback or stun, which you need for someone who costs 25 courage. And lastly, while he's down, he does not count towards team perks, meaning if you are, say, using a patrolman Glenn with an officer Pepper, and then you send out policeman Diaz as the third unit, Diaz will not get his hit points shield if Glenn is currently face down. His impact for me is more like something between a redneck and a grenadeless grenadier, with his only real application being in PvP. There, Glenn acts as an activator unit for proccing the military team's 3-man bonus multiple times. He can also do the same for the police team's 5-man bonus, but with much less impact, and really, police have better choices for their roster than him. Sadly, military does not. Other than his res delay, I also take issue with Glenn's low hit points compared to his insanely high courage cost. The only thing I do like about him is his low prep time since he's a fighter unit. If you use him as a 6th choice for a rednecks filled roster, then you can spam him out the bus a lot, and in this iteration he's actually quite good in large numbers where you can actually see the value of his self-reses more easily. Additionally, item set bonuses reset on each res, letting him make the most out of item sets like Lucky Guy and Carbon. Other than that though, he's pretty much good for PvP only. Just really an F tier unit for me. He can be a fun character, but I see him more as a novelty unit to play around with, more than someone you'll come to depend on. Carol used to be the queen of PvP. Way back in the early days, she could and would decimate skirmish teams in an amazing display of carnage. She's since been nerfed quite a few times and now seems to be in a somewhat okay place, still finding herself in many PvP teams, though not to the same effect as before. The one crippling fault about her is how gear dependent she is. Carol can still be good if you have the right equipment for her, but by that, I'm pretty much talking about maybe the top 10% of players or so. If her crit damage isn't past 200%, and if her melee isn't up to snuff, then she's doing nothing. This is because of the nature of her lightning strikes, which are guaranteed crits, which do great when she's one-shots the enemy as intended. But if she doesn't kill it then, or in the follow-up attack, then she's done for, and given that she costs 20, it makes her a little bit of a wasted investment as opposed to someone who does her job more effectively like the mechanic. Her available skins are also mostly lackluster except for her prisoner one. Her Northerner and Patriot skins are both useless and shouldn't be viewed as anything other than novelty unlocks for collectors. That said, I do like the aesthetic of her Northerner skin, but really though, she's a D tier unit in most cases, still finding some utility against weaker enemies like skeletons and some marauders. Jailer is the only unit in the game that actually costs real-world money to unlock. This might give the impression that he's some OP pay-to-win type of character, but I don't think so. He by no means sucks, I like using him, but I'll be honest, it took some time to warm up to him. His ability to stun up to 3 targets on his crits is his biggest draw, however, that comes with a somewhat slow crit swing. He also has a long prep time for a unit in his class, at 13 seconds as opposed to Redneck 6 and Rodriguez's 7. This is likely done to stop players from spamming him out and stun locking the entire field, or at least make doing so very difficult. All that said though, he can be very good if you have the right setup for him, which oddly enough to me is not damage but cost reduction, crit chance, and prep time. A 7-cost jailer who can pop out of the bus every 2 to 3 seconds with a 90% chance to crit is going to give most enemies a hard time. One alone won't do much, but when there's 3, all swinging crits in succession, it does wonders, especially against big slow enemies, which sort of has the opposite benefit that Rodriguez has. So where I see Rodriguez as the ultimate fighter against enemies you can knock back, Jailer is sort of a solid pick against enemies you can't knock back given that he's a stunner, but with similar stats to Rodriguez. For me, the best thing I like about Jailer is how he performs in his prisoner skin, which easily makes him an S-class unit to me. In that skin, he's like a budget tank, able to shrug off the first couple of heavy hits. He's probably my favorite melee unit in the game as prisoner, if for no other reason other than the fact that he tanks charged zombies better than anyone else. In his default Jailer skin, he's a lot less effective, but still benefits from their perks, especially the 5-man one, which helps you send out more. He's somewhat gear dependent since you want to get his cost down to 7, or as low as you can, and his crit up high. It's possible to outfit him where, with a gambling set, his crit chance is over 90%. With prep time lowered enough, you can stun lock everything and let stronger units pick off zombies with ease. That's how I like to use him, like a guy who buys you time to bring out the pain. For me, he's a solid B tier unit, S tier as a prisoner. Therefore, I'll settle for him as a low A tier unit overall. Now like Jailer, Rogue is a fighter who stuns on his crits, though Rogue stuns does not chain to others. That said though, there's little to no doubt that Rogue is the king of fighters, top dog, and probably the best standalone unit in the game. So yes, absolutely S tier for sure. There's a reason he costs the most to unlock and he will not disappoint. He's classed as a fighter, but hits hard and sticks around longer than damager class units, which by endgame lack the impact they had mid-game. I'll get into that later. His stats are insane and he does great on any team. Between his TMF and his police skin, I'd say his police skin is better since he's able to get the most from their 3 and 5-man perks. TMF is good, but he does rely on RNG with their cost reduction roulette. He does more for them than they for him. I think what I like most about Rogue is how he's just so versatile, able to fit into several different builds and do well in each iteration. Want to have a cheap but durable fighter who tanks? No problem. Want him to stun the enemy consistently and delay them? No problem. Want him to just dish out as much damage as possible? No problem. He does it all, and he does it well. His only real downsides is his longer prep time and his insanely low agility. He has the lowest base agility in the game and is the only unit who can equip a fully upgraded agility watch and still not be at 100 in that stat. Yet he needs agility for his bullet resistance, making the stat a bit of a priority if you use him to PvP, which you probably do, or do Marauder missions. Still, his pros far outweigh his cons, and after Austin, this guy ought to be everyone's first unlock. Rodriguez is an upgraded redneck in every way. What's more than that is his ability to dish out quick and frequent knockbacks. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that Rodriguez is the knockback king in this game. Nobody can do it better than he since he's so quick, cheap, and spammy. This is the best thing about him, and it makes him an ideal unit for any team. He's also a decent activator for the boss set, like his redneck brother, which is the main appeal of his Patriot skin. Overall, I think he's an S tier unit, right behind Rogue. His only drawback is that he sucks against knockback immune enemies, and his knife throw, when having poor timing if the enemies are too close to reaching the bus, delaying him from reaching them before they are able to make a hit on it. Other than that though, he's an amazing unit and well worth investing in. Cashier to me is like one of those characters in movies or shows that's so brutal they have to keep it locked up in a dark cage with only the whites of its eyes showing. There's a reason he's the only guy with 2 factionless skins. If he's added to the right team, he's going to be totally broken. His ability to hit harder than any other melee unit in the game is amazing. He has great stats, and his special ability of having quad damage on crits is awesome, especially given how he shares the highest base crit chance in the game, along with Saw. As great as that sounds, and it is, there is a catch, isn't there always? For him, it's the slow speed of his swings. He swings pretty slow, second only to Turbo in my opinion, and he's very susceptible to knockbacks. That, plus the fact that he has no resistances, makes him pretty squishy. Under the right cover, he can tear things apart in record time, but he needs that cover to operate well. Because of that, he doesn't always connect, and when he doesn't, it's a little frustrating because you want to see those big numbers pop up. For that, I'd say he's close to being low A, but I'm going to put him at the top of the B list. Like Cashier, Mechanic is an extremely hard hitter. Unlike Cashier, his swings are lightning fast, able to at times target and kill even blue spheres before they're able to hit him, which is saying something. As you know though, that's with the caveat that he will drop his hammer after hitting a target that he doesn't kill, thereby limiting his damage and transforming him into cannon fodder of the lowest tier. Mechanic to me is like a one-trick pony that does his one trick very well and is extremely valuable for it, especially in the late stages of the game where you want him to be eviscerating zombies that he's able to one-shot like insectoids and even twins if he's geared enough. On that, his usefulness does vary as he's required to have a little bit of pretty good gear to be more effective. It's not as bad as other units though. The main downside to him is that he absolutely needs to have a special ability unlocked to be of any utility. Without it, he's pretty much garbage, especially given his recent cost nerf from 15 to 20. He also has a pretty lengthy prep time and definitely needs a prep time watch to function well, but these are all pretty small things. Other than that, he's amazing and in certain missions just downright necessary. A great unit overall and worthy of being an S tier rank unit, I think. Moving on to shotgunners, and starting off with the Farmer. Farmer is the first shotgunner obtained and sort of serves as the baseline from which all other shotguns are compared to because of it. He's someone I think you use for a little bit at the start, and then you forget as you unlock more units and don't come back to until the end. Well, at least that's what I did for both of my playthroughs. The reason he gets dropped off is simply because there are better alternatives at that time, and there's a desire to check out other units as well. The reason he comes back is because he is very good end game if you have the right gear for him. Farmer is great, but yeah, he's hugely gear dependent. He has some decent skins, my favorite probably being Red Streak for the Patriots team. College has some really good potential now too because of its revamped 2-man bonus, but on this team he's someone who benefits immensely but contributes very little given how his charisma is an abysmal 100. That said, I like using him, and his only real bane is his slow speed and insectoid zombies who make extremely short work of him. Good unit though, solid B rank I think. Lester is a power creep and farmer in two ways. The first of which is that he reloads faster, and the second is that his default Northerners faction skin is a much better fit to a shotgunner like him than anything else. Aside from that, all other stats are the exact same as the farmer. So everything I just said about the farmer sort of applies to Lester as well. Lester is the king of Metro with an amazing burst damage potential, especially when comboed with a boss set equipped to Worthy. His Jailer skin as Transporter Lester, while not as good as his Northerner skin, is still very good. The prep time reduction from their 5-man bonus works great with him, and he's a perfect fit for that faction. With all that said, I actually think he's an A tier character if you have the right gear for him. Just a step above the farmer. Ranger is the fastest shotgunner in terms of mobility. I think the fact that he sacrifices damage output for other things makes him get overlooked a little bit, but I really like him, especially in his Marine skin. His special ability that knocks back enemies is perfect for annoying little guys like Prisoner and Locust zombies. His quick speed in comparison to the 12-gauge boys and Diaz is also really helpful for when you need someone to get up to slow down zombie hordes in a hurry. He's a good choice for TMF as well, given how he's their second cheapest option, which helps their team perks. Sadly, he does porous as IF, where none of the bonuses really help him except for the 5-man bonus, which really helps everyone since it's a debuff. To me, a low B tier unit. You could argue that Policeman Diaz is the best unit in the game for story missions, especially prior to his cost increase. I'd say he does exceptionally well, right up until Location 9, where his utility vastly drops off in the face of newer zombies that counter much of what he does, notably the escapee. At that part of the game, his health pool just doesn't seem to keep up or do enough despite the melee damage reduction perk that he has. However, that still makes him highly worth getting into, as he's a good shield against insectoids on most levels, places like Location 9, Mission 57, and a few others being the exception. His worst trait, I think, is his slow speed, and I don't think his cost increase has aged well. When it was done, I could understand why and the reasons, but given how the difficulty is ramped up endgame, I think Moby should consider bringing his cost back to 25. Another fault of his, which granted applies to a lot of units, is that he has no viability outside story missions and some events. He's too slow and expensive for Metro, and has no range resistance, which makes him mostly a bad choice for PvP. Still, despite not having spent much time using him in recent months, I think he's a solid high A tier choice, with his limited use in Location 9 being the only thing barring him from getting the S rank kiss. This goes both for his mechanic skin and his police skin, to which he's an excellent fit into both. I'm hoping this year he gets a Desperado skin too. His Desperado skin gets a home, I should say. Flamethrower is a unit who probably has the biggest difference in utility depending on which skin you have. On TMF, he's actually very mediocre. On Patriots, he's a powerhouse, able to do more DPS to resistant enemies than anyone else, and finally bringing that team to prominence. If you're not aware, this guy is the closest answer to kill, is the best answer to killing double-headed zombies, since those zombies won't switch to its second head if Flamethrower is the one to kill it. Pretty weird considering how double heads are fire immune. I'm not sure if this is a bug or intended, but if it's the former, then I hope it never gets fixed. He's a great addition, but you really want him in his Patriot skin, with some good gear, preferably military, but firefighter works on levels that don't have fireproof zombies. Quick edit, but I wanted to add in the Gentleman's set as well, since Flamethrower has a very high rate of fire. Depending on the stats you have in your items, this may very well be the most optimal set for him. TMF, I'd say he's D tier. Patriots, I think he's A tier, so I'll put him in B as a happy medium. Dr. Norman, the Cryomancer, ironically, he's fire immune, while Flamethrower has no fire resistance. That's weird to me. But anyhow, Dr. Norman has some really good uses in that his damage doesn't get mitigated by any zombie, making him a great choice in that he damages and slows enemies down. The one really bad thing about him is that he explodes when he dies and freezes everything in the vicinity of that explosion, making him a really shitty choice with melee and ranged units that are caught in that explosion, which is a lot. His final perk of having a chance to drop a nitro tank also sucks, since he drops it where he dies, and that's usually a bad spot. So yeah, despite how unique he is the ultimate saboteur and a huge gamble. For that, I'd say he's D tier unit overall. It does have some very niche applications and shouldn't always be overlooked. Also, he has the pleasure of pretty much being the only unit who can go well with the Icebreaker set, if you're into that set at all. On to heavyweights, and starting off with Lionheart. Lionheart, up straight, not a good character. He's interesting. He has a really good crit chance and his hits inflict knockbacks. However, he has many fatal flaws, with his active ability being chief among them. That he spreads fire, hitting everything around him, including your own units, really makes this guy a solo fighter. The only people he can team up with is the firefighter, who sucks as well, and any other units who are fireproof like the core scientist team, none of whom have emergency skins. It also takes a couple of seconds for him to spread his flames, making him vulnerable, so you need to be somewhat adequate at timing it. Lastly, his health pool is pretty low, and he has no melee resistance, which makes him a poor choice in most situations. All situations, actually. There's simply just better people to choose from. The only zombie I think he does well on is the twin zombies, who's slow enough to get hit by his fire, takes full damage from it, and gets knocked back by his stabs. He has a very high damage potential, but that potential is never reached. In later missions, there are more than a few fireproof zombies, making him even more obsolete. If they totally reworked him, I could see it happening, but really as it is now, he's a novelty unit and not worth getting into outside of maybe events or PvP, where there's some experimentation there for the curious. F rank for me though. Chopper, I think, gets overlooked by a lot of people because he has a slow crit swing. However, and he moves pretty slowly too. However, when I was working through Location 9, I found that I had him on my team on just about every mission where he had an available skin to the team that I was playing it on. His high health and his self-heal ability just makes him a good fit for a lot of those missions. His health is crazy in his Mountie skin if you include the police faction's shield bonus. He generates courage like a magnet as a redneck, and his clown skin just fits in very well with Berserker and Saw backing him up. His northerner skin is easily the weakest of the bunch, so he's definitely a unit who needs some investment. He's also a bit gear dependent since you'll need to play into his high health capacity as much as you can. Big Boy is probably the most obvious fit for him, but I honestly like using either carbon or builder sets for him since he feels squishy despite his high health pool. Either way, I like this unit, though he is a little exclusive with 2 of his skins being behind events. Still, if you have either of those, or both, I'd recommend trying him out a bit more. If not, it's fine, because in my opinion, his redneck skin is his best one. So to me, he's about a B tier unit, maybe high C. I'm not sure, I guess I'll just put him here. Up next is Soldier, and I gotta know, what is Soldier's training routine? I ask because it always seems like he's out of breath, especially after exiting the bus. I like him, though he did take some getting used to. I used to hate the fact that medium to fast moving zombies could, whiz right by him. He's sort of like an immovable wall that can push forward easily, but doesn't like to move up or down. That said, however, I do think he is the best heavyweight in the game. He has the best unit perks for his class, having reduction to melee and ranged, poison resist, a shield, and doesn't turn to a zombie on death. Those are hard perks to turn away from. He's even better with Nancy at his back or under a medkit, where killing him becomes nearly impossible if he has enough health. I think he is best in his emergency skin given that they get the 25% boost to their hit points, followed by his IF skin. He's probably the best unit for IF since he benefits the most from the med pack. His TMF skin is his worst one, I think, given just how expensive he is. Even if his cost gets reduced, it's still really high and his prep time doesn't get affected by their 5-man perk. I think overall, he's a solid A tier character, with his TMF skin probably being B tier, so maybe a low A rating overall. Juggernaut is a character that seems to go one of 2 ways, but not both unless you have pitch perfect gear for him. Route A, you can set him up to be a tank, going all in on health, cost reduction, and some melee boosts. Route B, you can play into a special ability and try and make him into this death-dealing crit machine. His Hammer Blast crit strike has a sizable radius, and if set up right on the right levels, he can turn into an absolute monster. His drawback is that doing both is near impossible given how you need health, melee boost, crit chance boost, and crit damage boosting items to make it work, as well as cost reduction. That's a good balance of 5 stats there, making it hard for most players, I think. Another big flaw of his is just how costly he is, and how his crit stams can knock back his position a bit, or they do knock back his position a bit, giving zombies time to inch forward. It does come with the bonus of giving him a very brief period of invulnerability during the animation though. I like him most in his Psycho skin, and least in his military skin, though that skin does aesthetically look amazing. But he's not a good fit for the military team, only benefiting from their 2-man perk and having a negative effect from their 5-man perk, making him one of the only units who's made actively worse from a team perk. He has good PvP viability and is often seen in his builder skin or his military one, with the former being more prevalent at the moment. I think he's good, a high C tier unit, maybe low B, slightly better than Chopper, but behind Soldier. The one thing I like about him over Chopper is his faster prep time, albeit he's more expensive than Chopper. Willie is the strangest unit in the game by no small margin. He's a heavyweight, but has the lowest base hit points for that class by a significant margin. He fights up close, but with ranged attacks. His ranged attacks are stun shots which bypass range resistances, making his damage type unique. He wears all this gear, especially in his scientist skin, but has no resistances outside his range reduction. I mean, at the very least, they ought to give him poison resistance. I mean, look at him, he has 2 masks on. Anyhow, he costs a lot, and his only real bonus is his shield that he brings out and his stun gun. His shield durability is rather low since it's based on his hit points, which also in turn is comparatively low. The fact that he's technically ranged works a bit to his disadvantage since he loses the ability to cleave enemies but still fights up close. He's one of the only units, probably the only one besides Abby, who will fight on a fairly frequent basis with a mix of ranged and melee attacks, given how close he gets to his targets, alternating between his stun gun and his shield slam depending on proximity to the target. That said, his stun gun attack is a guaranteed stun, of course, when used with the piercing set, he's able to stun 2 enemies fairly frequently. I don't mind Willie, but his applications are somewhat niche. I think his cost is fine, but his stats need to go up if that makes sense. He needs more, and in comparison to other heavyweights, his only real advantage is his low prep time. As I see him now though, I think he's about a D tier unit. I do like that old animation where it's revealed that he's actually this super busty girl underneath all that armor. That made me laugh, but I think it'd be great if they made it canon, which they should do by making an unarmored skin available. Anyhow, Red Hood. Red Hood's kind of neat, but mostly novelty. I think he's a step or two away from being really good, but he needs a few things adjusted, not least of which is the radius of his wave effect and making him knockback immune. As he is now though, I doubt there'll be much change given how exclusive he is unless it's an update close to Christmas. I like using him, and I like a lot of things about him, but yeah, I just wish that wave attack had a larger effect on it, because it's a neat concept and it makes him an interesting choice. I'd also like to see another skin given to him, and I suspect we'll probably see one at the end of the year. For now, I think he's probably high D or low C tier unit. Moving into damagers, and starting that off is Turbo. Turbo is my favorite unit of the damager class, and that's probably a bigger statement about the state of damagers than it is about her. Damagers are in a bad spot endgame, with all of them being pretty much unable to keep up with the insane damage being thrown around by hard-hitting zombies, or zombies with enormous health pools that they can't chunk down fast enough. Turbo is a standout unit though in a couple of ways. First is her amazing speed, on par with the welder and who can only be outran by a sledgehammer mechanic, I think. Second is the fact that she's 100% bulletproof, making her perfect on marauder missions. Last is her knockback effect from her crit swings, which, when specced into with a lot of valor, can send enemies off screen pretty much. The caveat, however, is that she by far has the lowest crit swing in the game, making such a build as usually, counterproductive and more of something you do for fun. I do like using her though. I've just found her to be slightly more longer lasting than other damagers in my own experience. Even so, she's best used as the de facto unit in the corn farm event, or against marauders. So yeah, she has some really good uses, but against standard enemies only fares so well. She also has the lowest valor in the game and will need a few items with that stat to make up for it. In total, I'd say she's a high C, maybe a low B unit. Good under the right circumstances. Next up is Firefighter, who in my opinion is mostly useless outside some extremely niche uses, or situations I should say. His one real perk is that he has some interesting resistances, being the only melee unit who's poison, fire, and explosion immune. That's about as far as it goes though. His lack of a stun or knockback combined with his high cost and slow speed make him a unit who will die pretty quickly on harder missions. If his special ability is unlocked, the Molotov he throws will often hit your own units, making him completely useless outside being combined with other fireproof units like Lionheart or the Core Scientist team. Worse yet is if you're fighting against zombies that are fireproof, meaning that the only units that get hit are your own. I'm not sure if all units require being balanced. There's always going to be a hierarchy like what we're doing now, and Firefighter just happens to be a guy in the low rung on the ladder here. If they were to balance him out though, I'd say he needs a stun or knockback like most others in this category. That would just be a start though. I'd also make sure that his special ability does something useful like increase the target's vulnerability to fire damage. Just a few suggestions, but as it stands now, he's a low E or F tier unit. However, if Firefighter seemed bad, Builder is somehow even worse. He lacks just about any kind of utility whatsoever. His bullet resistance doesn't do much given how slow he runs, usually resulting in him arriving at the end at enemy marauders with half his health missing. His special ability to deal double damage to the barricade is okay, but Saw has the same ability and does it better. On top of all that, he's simply too expensive and has too low stats to be of any use. Even in the lower locations of the game, he isn't all that great. His one redeeming quality is a quick knockback kick from his crits, but sadly, again, it just doesn't compete with other units. Basically, Builder gets completely outclassed by just about every other melee unit in the game in just about every way. Bottom of the ladder from me. Light Soldier is a good unit in the low to mid areas of the game, but by endgame he usually just falls short of being viable. He's not bad, but I found that there's not enough to keep him going. Of the damager class, he's probably the best if I were to be objective about it. I do kind of personally prefer Turbo over him. I like his poison and range resistances, but like a lot of others in this class, he's slow to move. His stats are decent though, and he does have some uses depending on the team that he's on. He's not a bad backup for Soldier on the IF team, and he's the only other melee unit on the Scientist team outside of Saul, so there's some exclusivity to him there. Overall, I think he's a good unit in a bad class and suffers from that. In the later stages, he needs either a health bump, a shield, or some kind of melee damage resistance. Honestly, he's like a lesser rogue that's more expensive, and that just makes him mediocre to me, so a C tier unit for sure. Guard is a character I've tried to like, but there's just two crippling things I hate about him. First is his cost. He's way too expensive for being a unit similar to Light Soldier, and this sort of undersells his low prep time since you're never going to be able to spam this guy out the door. Second is his god-awful zombie transformation, turning into one of those resurrecting undead zombies, which is just flat out annoying to deal with. So yeah, I find those two things about him to overshadow any of his good qualities, the most of which is his quick knockback kick and his high crit chance. He does better in his Marine skin than his Jailer skin, and makes for a good addition on a Marine skirmish team though. Still, overall, I think Guard is a low D tier character. Grenadier is good in the low and mid levels of the game, but since his grenade is flat damage that doesn't scale, he gets outclassed pretty early on. He's good in PvP, but outside of that, he's pretty low tier for me. His best skin is his military one, and while he's not terribly bad, he doesn't do enough later to make him worthwhile. Fun fact, but apparently he was the only courage unit not made available in Skirmish's early days, in part because his grenade was deemed too strong. Too bad he doesn't carry that same weight into PvE. I think early on, he's a B tier unit who eventually makes his way to a low C or D tier unit by end game. Moving on to Abby, and you know, I never knew Abby was a damager class unit until I was writing this out, which is weird. But yeah, weird damager, but I can see why since she brings pain like none other once she spins up that minigun. There's not much I can really say about her. She's absolutely critical in metro levels, and she's awesome in her Jailer skin since you can get more of them out more reliably. Unreliably, she's good as a builder, but only when she gets procced out from their team perks. She's also one of the few ranged units who can do better with the Gentleman item set given her extremely high rate of fire from her minigun. In total, I like her because she specializes in something and carries out that task well. But once she drops the gun, it's over since she sucks at everything else she does. So yeah, I'd say she's a high C, low B unit. Cool in some levels, necessary, but costly and slow to actually start shooting, which I'm actually thankful for because that Juggernaut Polina Abby trio in Skirmish was tiresome for a long time. Moving to support units and starting off with Pepper. Pepper is sort of the game's mascot to me. It's too bad she's not terribly useful though. The good thing about Pepper is her inspiration kiss when she exits the bus, buffing all units on the field, and her stickiness, having both a knockback kick and an evasive roll, so she can actually stick around for quite some time. However, it all gets overshadowed by her low damage and her aim time. She simply takes a long time to line up targets in her sights and fire her weapon. I noticed this when I was doing runs with her to up her mastery level. She seems to just really aim carefully like she's forever on her last clip of ammo, making every shot count. It's nice, but she's ineffective. These things, combined with her high cost, just makes her not competitive later on. As of this video, she's currently the only unit to have 5 available skins, which plays into her versatility, but it's not really enough. When putting together a team, I almost always find that there's just somebody a bit better to have and she gets left out. I think this would change if her cost got dropped to 20 or if she was given a lower prep time. I'd like to use her more, but as it stands now, she's a bit low tier. E tier character, D tier for her police skin, which is the best of the bunch. Agents. The only bad thing about agents is that they have no skins other than the police faction, which granted is an excellent fit for them, but still, I'd like to see them on some other teams this year. Other than that, they are absolutely amazing and the closest thing to an assassin this game has. Stealth perk, being available at the start of every mission, and their 2-for-1 perk of team powers makes these guys a must-have on every range-heavy team. Their high rate of fire and large clip mags make them one of the few ranged units alongside with Abby that benefit immensely from the gentleman set as opposed to military or hunter, which granted are both still very viable and competitive sets for them. Either way, these guys are an easy S tier for sure. Cap is, he's alright. I think he works best on teams that can, well, I wouldn't say he's alright, maybe he's a little bit lacking to me. I think he works best on teams that can send out a lot of units and helps teams get ahead but not catch up. He's good on a team like College, especially given his high charisma, which is an extra bonus for them. I think my main issue with Cap is his low DPS. I wish he could buff while firing, it'd make him a lot more viable as a unit. Like Pepper, I also think he's too expensive. However, I am glad that his special ability got updated to boost the reload time of all units instead of just SWATs, because as it was before, it was just downright terrible. Is he a good support unit? Yeah. Is he a good shooter? No. I think a lot of support units are overcost for what they bring. I'll put it like this. It sucks when he's the procced unit from the TMF's 3-man bonus, or when he's the one who gets the cost reduction from their 5-man bonus. That's how little impact he has. The issue he and Pepper have is that they are mostly win more units that increase an already present momentum, but do very little to help catch up or push back against hard aggression, and in later locations of the game, you need the latter far more than you do the former. As it is now, he's a C tier character for College, but probably an E tier character for TMF. So overall, I'd say he's a D tier unit. Queen. Queen is my favorite character in Skirmish and has single-handedly won me more matches than anyone else. She's complete chaos on the field and I love it. Sadly, I do think she's the weakest of the circus pack, but still fun to use. The best thing about Queen is that she ties with Nancy for being the least gear-dependent character in the game. She just needs health and that's pretty much it. Granted, she needs a lot of it given how low her base health is, but that's still a pretty simple thing to do. I hope she gets another skin this year. It'd be nice to see her get some love, especially a Patriot skin. For now though, I think she's a solid C tier unit. Now, it goes without saying that Austin is the most necessary unit to progress in the game. So in a way, he almost merits his own category of not being S tier, because he definitely isn't, but something like N for need. If you don't have him, you're going nowhere, but you already know that. I think he's a neat unit, not just in his ability to earn gold, but also in the fact that he's the only ranged unit that costs rage. This actually gives him a bit of flexibility, especially in his police skin, since he can be sent out without worrying too much about costs. He is slow to act and he's not too great, but he is sort of a send and forget unit that you don't need to pay attention to. Does that make him good? Not really. Almost so that I'd say he's a high D tier unit. Not totally usable, but not completely useless either in a practical sense. Maria is my second favorite support unit in the game. She's a bit costly, but the buff she brings is amazing. I actually like using her with the carbon set when combined with her prisoner skin. It actually makes her pretty sticky to the field. With that, she's able to be sent out relatively quickly and can tank a few charged zombie hits, which helps. Besides having no resistances, her only real downside is the long reload time she has, which I think is only matched by Carlos. Other than that, she's a really cool character and a low A tier character in my books. Dr. Miller is a unit I would like to see work, but doesn't, in large part due to the fact that his landmine's damage doesn't scale and becomes very underwhelming later. much like the Grenadier's grenade. Combine that with the fact that he runs ultra slow with the landmine, taking quite a bit of time to get where he's to plant it, this makes him pretty much useless. He's relatively cheap and easy to send out, but his impact is such that he just doesn't make much of a difference. It's also annoying how his landmines are impacted by things like demon zombie shockwaves and the like, making him that much worse. So yeah, an E tier unit from me. Medic, and I've said this before, but I guess I'll say it again, easily has the worst AI in the game in terms of just how bad she is at throwing her med packs. And in recent patches, I swear it somehow has gotten even worse. She's too expensive, and while I can forgive her low damage, I can't get over how bad she is in the field. That said, however, her viability has gone up ever since the med pack got upgraded to be good again, and in doing so, has done so with her as well. So she does have her uses, but you really want to get her cost down as cheap as possible, because as I see it, she's pretty much a 35 courage costing double med pack drop. She dies pretty quickly. Her best skin is her IF one, which plays into the med pack role hard, followed by her default emergency one. All in all, I think she's a D tier character at best. In the support class of units, Nancy is top dog to me. She has everything I want. Great healing, high health, fast speed, and amazing value in her ability to res units. For new players, I'd say she ought to be the second unit purchased with gold just after Rogue. I only see two bad things about her. First and most obvious is her death reanimation, instantly turning her into a zombie that kills most everything around her. She's the only one besides Saw who can't be resurrected. It sucks, but I understand it as it counterbalances her power level, which is pretty high. The second fault I find is the significant difference in terms of team powers depending on her skin. Her redneck skin is top tier, hands down, but her marine skin is, comparatively, it's just utter trash, so she gains nothing from any of the team's perks. Don't get me wrong, she's a great addition on any team in any skin, but as far as which skin to unlock, it's a no-brainer. Go rednecks first, and don't bother with her Marines one unless you are a devoted Marines team player. In total, I think she is an S-rank unit for sure. Welder, the most expensive unit in the game by sheer numbers and utterly useless on most missions, I think. He's just a complete and total gamble. There are just so many bad things about him, but I'll name a few. First is his insanely long prep time, over a minute long to get him out the door. That's huge. Second is his ridiculous cost. Again, terrible, but not as much as, say, a high cost courage unit, since rage is fairly easy to come by. Third is his pathetic stats, with a health pool so low that he dies to just about anything. That said, I have seen him do some sneaky stuff on certain missions, not least of which was my video on Location 9 Mission 57, where two of them took down the barricade by themselves, which was nice to see. But honestly, it was probably luck, because if anything lines up with him and he's at the barricade, then it's over, and you're stuck waiting for another minute or two to send out another. You basically have to have two or three tries to get him out to break the barricade before the final wave countdown begins. So yeah, a low E-class unit. Not F-class only because he does some unique things that no other unit does, and could potentially be a sleeper unit that saves the day. It's very rare though. Going into the shooters category of units, and starting off with the Gunslinger. Gunslinger got some really nice buffs in recent patches. Not only was his accuracy improved, but his cost was reduced, making him the cheapest ranged unit in the game. So with those changes in effect, I actually think he's a good unit. Great for his value and just someone you can send out since he doesn't cost a lot, but in numbers, he can make a pretty good dent. He does suffer from a pretty lengthy prep time though, which works against his cost. It's also a good activator unit for the Patriots 3-man bonus since he's cheap and stays out of reach of most zombies. So yeah, he's a solid C tier unit, maybe a high C tier unit. Carlos, like Gunslinger, also suffers from a pretty lengthy prep time. He's better than Gunslinger, albeit a little more, a little more powerful, but a little bit longer and more expensive, I should say. However, Carlos does move slowly, and he takes too long to reload. To me, Carlos has and always will play second fiddle to Sonya. He fits in well to the factions he belongs to though, and for that, I think I'd give him an edge above Gunslinger. High C tier, maybe a low B tier. SWAT is one of the very few units who wants and does well with charisma. His shots are the most powerful of the shooters, but suffers from having the worst accuracy, often unable to hit the broadside of a barn. To compensate for that, he combos well with Maria, so it's too bad they don't share any factions though. His ability to light enemies on fire is extremely lackluster since the fire damage he inflicts is paltry. I still like using him, and he does great in mid and close quarter range combat. His Firestarter skin is great for that team as well. All in all, probably a B tier character. Low A for his emergency skin if you're playing into that team hard. Spec Ops seems really great on paper given all the bonuses he has. However, I found him to be mostly very mid in performance given his low accuracy. Then again, I don't change his layout much since I mostly relegate him to skirmish. I think the worst thing about him is his deployment method, which oddly enough is touted as a bonus. It takes too long for him to drop down in high pressure situations, which for military on story missions is a lot. And in almost every situation you want him in the back anyways to provide range support like he's supposed to. So to me, it just makes more sense for him to come out of the bus like everyone else. He's great when he's procced in by the military's 3-man bonus, but in story missions that's a bit harder to pull off now. And really, I just don't think he's all that outside of PvP. PvP in some events, he's excellent, but I'm primarily looking at story missions here, so I'm giving him a C rating. Sonya is my sweetheart, my favorite. The one who carried me through so many missions in my early days playing the game. I even get tongue-tied when I'm talking about her. I just can't speak ill of her. She's the jack of all trades, the master of many. She does it all. It's quick, accurate, has a great knockback, good hit points for her class, and just solid power potential. If she had range resistance, she'd be perfect. She really comes up to be, my personal favorite unit in the game, despite her sort of crappy final ability. There's some interesting loadouts you can give her as well depending on her skin. I've tried to do a crit build with her Northerner skin, which when used with the Gentleman set can do pretty well. Cheerleader takes the most advantage of her final perk, but she's toughest in her Prisoner skin and most effective as a Marine. Of them all, I probably like Prisoner the most, but they're all really good. To me, a high A, maybe low S tier for me. If I had to choose, I'd say S, but I'm biased, so I guess I'll put her here. Dr. Kane has a few unique traits, most prevalent of which is his debuff, but he's also notable for his crazy resistances, having the best overall resistances in the game. The guy is just pretty much everything proof. He's easily the best unit of the Scientist pack with no real drawback other than his slow speed to draw his weapon after he does the debuff, and his higher cost. It's not unreasonable though, and I think he's an excellent unit. Easily the best Scientist, and the one who sees the most play I reckon. A high A tier character to me. Going into snipers, the last class of the game, and the fewest in number, and starting off with Charlotte, who I think is a great unit. A tier unit, I think, especially after her final ability got buffed so it actually makes an impact now. She hits hard, but she can be slow to come out, and is a little expensive compared to other snipers. She's best off in her Sheriff skin, but does pretty well in her Patriots too. She is slightly gear dependent, wanting damage, ranged, and cost reduction to compensate for her weaknesses. That being said, she has shorter range than Polina and costs more. The shield she gets from the police faction, along with, all the other perks they have, really play out well for her, making her an almost auto-include when using that team. Andrea is the game's great disappointment, I think. Guaranteed, every person who gets her during the Halloween event gets a little bit excited because she's a completely new unit and was only released in 2023, making her a pretty new addition as well. Yet, despite the novelty of it all, she just flat out sucks, I think. I've gone into detail about her in the past, so I don't want to elaborate too much, but she's just overall a bad unit given how much of her stats and perks conflict with each other. Stealth perk, but she has a long prep time. An explosive shot, which negates her stealth perk. She has low damage and a very low rate of fire, possibly the lowest in the game, easily the lowest for range units. She has short range despite being classed as a sniper, and well, she just sucks overall, which is tragic because she looks awesome and she's the only bow using unit in the game, so I hope she gets a huge rework at some point again, but for now she goes to the bottom. Novelty character for sure.
The righteous and the meek may recoil at its cost, but they have no vision. Power alone is not to be feared. Fear instead those who wield it.
Last but certainly not least is Paulina, who is the PvP queen included on every team, which makes sense given her damage output, bullet penetration, and sheer range. She is absolutely amazing for her costs, and her only drawback is her slow movement speed and rate of fire, and prep time if you don't have a prep time watch. If you're able to get her range past 400, she never leaves the bus safety zone and therefore won't be targeted by insectoids. She will still die to charge zombie hits though, since that counts as splash damage. For that, she is very gear dependent, but I think she's a unit most players will put time and effort into because, well, she's worth it. She's the best of the snipers and maybe the best of the ranged units. S tier, I think. That's about all I have for this video. Well, that's quite a bit, I guess. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again in the